hello. It's Friday, and that means new records, and that means fantastic discussion with Find My Past family history community. Welcome to Find My Past from home on Friday. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good day for wherever you are and whoever you are. My name is Jen Baldwin. I am the research specialist for Find My Past, and I am happy to be with you guys. It's been a little while. I feel like I had to skip last month for some reason. I don't remember though. Anyway, it's been a while and I'm happy to be back. Thank you all very much for being with us. Already have people commenting. Shirley was first. She was here just before we started. Thank you, Shirley, for being with us from a soggy Cambridgeshire. But I'm glad the sun has come out for you. We have a great day planned today, a great hour. Nice. Oh, my watch is talking to me. She said it's not nice. That's funny. Technology. I don't know what I said. I queued her up, but okay. All right. We have Ellie in the comments today. Say hello to Ellie. We have a special guest today that I will introduce in a little bit, and I am so excited I get to introduce her. So that is fun. All right. Lots of you already chiming in. Hello. Looks like CV Bob from Vancouver Island. Yeah, Bob. Yeah, 2.5 month drought. I really do hope you get rain as well. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been watching it carefully. The fires up there going strong in Washington. My thoughts are with y'all. It's scary stuff. Ellen is with us in Illinois. Andrew's in Lancashire. Gina's with us as well. Some of you are watching and chiming in from all over the country. It's snowing in Calgary, Alberta. Gordon wins the weather report today, I think. So I'm sure no one else will be able to say that. George is with us. Kath is here. Stevie's with us. Gina, Rosie. Oh, it's a miserable gray day. Roxanne in Utah. Gosh, all sorts of you. This is fun. Oh, Liam's with us. That's good. Hi, Liam. Allison and Peter and Jane and David, Nita. This is some of you I don't know. This is really fun and exciting, actually. Jennifer's telling me the sound is not very good. Ellie, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? All right. It sounds all right on our end, Jennifer, but we'll keep our eyes on it just to make sure that nothing's going buggy. You know those gremlins are always around. All sorts of you. All right. Mora is from the original Washington, Tyne and Ware. Yeah, it's the ancestral home of President George Washington. Absolutely. We have some photos on Find My Past of that area that actually came from the Library of Congress over here in the US. And the reason the Library of Congress has them is because it's the ancestral home of George Washington. So yeah, all those little connections. I love taking them. And it actually plays onto our theme for the day. Everybody's telling me I'm echoey. I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. I will try to enunciate as best I can. How's it sound on Facebook going over to YouTube? I don't know. I'm just going to keep talking. Hopefully this works out. And we'll just go. We'll see what happens. Let's talk about new records this week. That is always what we like to start with. Where are my banners? New records. New records this week are pretty exciting. And we've got some material to talk about from the Caribbean, actually, and the islands, the British West Indies, as they were once known. So new this week includes Caribbean Oath Association rolls from 1696. So these are British settlers in the Caribbean who were first to pledge their allegiance to William III. Remember, there's a whole uprising happening with William III taking over the monarchy. And basically, he said, you kind of have to sign this. I'm not really giving you much of a choice. And people signed it whether they wanted to or not, actually. The whole point was this religious question, right? He had transitioned from a Catholic monarchy to a Protestant. There was this well-known tradition that God chose the monarch, and so a change in religion kind of doesn't agree with that. So he basically went out to all of the aristocrats and the political leaders, the military leaders, influential businessmen, and said, here, sign this, and actually show the community and the public that I'm in charge and I'm supposed to be here. So they had to sign. Most of the records from the Caribbean collection of these oath rolls are from Bermuda, but it does include a handful of other locations, including St. Kitts and Nevis and Antigua. And these are, for the most part, military folks that were stationed in the islands. The second collection this week that we've added to actually is the Barbados Birth and Baptism set from 1637 to 1891. This is kind of adding more to an existing collection, but ties in really nicely to our newspaper collection. Because it does stretch to 1891, these are people you might find in newspapers, right? So Barbados newspapers and the Barbados baptism records kind of go hand in hand. So make sure that if you're utilizing these records, you're also going to those newspapers from the Caribbean to learn about what their life was actually like. And then brand new on the site and only on Findmypast is the Methodist Marriages from Montserrat. And I'm pretty sure I pronounced that wrongly, but I'm not 100%. I don't know. Anyway, this Methodist collection of marriages spreads from 1820 to 1841. And this particular record set is very unique and special. This is some of the earliest known Methodist marriages on the island. And these are some of the earliest known marriages amongst the enslaved and freed people. Gosh, I'm having a hard time talking today. On the island in the West Indies. So Methodism was actually introduced to this community by a woman named Kitty Dorset, who was in fact enslaved herself. When she arrived on the island in 1810, the religion spread very quickly across the population. And so the couples that you're going to find in this index are both of African descent. They're Black, but they're also mixed race. And up until 1833, of course, when the act of slavery is abolished, most of them are enslaved peoples from the start of the collection, 1820 up to 1833. So when you find an indication or a marriage of residence on their marriage record, you're actually looking at probably the plantation in which they are held and being forced into labor. Specifically there for the men, we didn't come across very many residence locations for the women, but you might also find occupation notes on there as well. So very interesting record set, and absolutely one that is of value. Even if you don't have ancestors on these islands at the time, it's a great way to kind of play around with the record set and expose yourself to something new and different, and kind of gain familiarity with how the West Indies were managed, how these kind of outlying territories were actually organized and how they functioned during this period. Let me do a quick check on comments. Okay. Linda wants to know who fed the gremlins, and I agree, actually. I want to know too, because as Ellie said in the comments, we actually had a little bit of trouble scheduling this morning as well. So yeah, a little bit tricky today. Hopefully the recording comes through just fine and you guys can come back to it if you need to, if you miss something. Okay, so also new this week is newspapers. We also obviously always want to talk about newspapers all the time. I wish my job was just reading old newspapers, actually. Can I have that job? Ellen wants that job too. So we're going to go to our manager and ask for a new job title and just read historic newspapers all day, every day. I'm not going to share anything. I'm just going to read it for myself. New this week is a really fascinating title, actually. Comes from London's East End. It's the Eastern Argus and Borough of Hackney Times. A very long title. Oh, Rose is with us. Yay, Rose. I was just about to talk about you. Rose shared this with us earlier this week. And so on the blog for the British Newspaper Archive today, you will find a blog about this new title. And Rose has done some really fantastic research and looked at other parts of the news and other newspaper titles around London that kind of showcase what was happening in the East End during this period. And this is, of course, the period of Jack the Ripper. And so this newspaper that we just published, this Eastern Argus and Borough of Hackney Times, covers that period. And they actually seem to enjoy reporting on things like that. So you'll see a lot of sudden deaths, fatal accidents, and then, of course, a lot of entries around Jack the Ripper. We had a fascinating discussion earlier this week amongst the staff about this title. It was a good time. So check out the blog on the BNA website for some background information on this. And then, of course, the list of all the other newspapers that we've updated. This is the only new title this week, but we have updated a huge list of other titles. And just to tease you a little bit, get you ready for the weekend of research. I saw editions as early as 1864 and going all the way up to 1996 in this week's release of newspapers. So a huge span of time. Of course, all sorts of variations in between, but we are always excited, of course, about our newspaper updates. So definitely go check that out. Okay, let's put up the question of the week. I went through that a lot faster than I thought I was going to. So question of the week, how has the ripple effect of family history captured you? And I hope what I'm asking is clear, right? What questions did you ask in the process of research you never would have thought to ask if it weren't for a previous discovery? So we actually did an exercise for the staff this week at Findmypast, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that later. We talked about an individual who actually is found kind of migrating into the United States. And the whole objective of the exercise was to think like a genealogist and go, well, what questions would you ask if you had found this record about your ancestor? And so we're going to use that example actually today. And that's where this question kind of came from. What is the ripple effect of knowledge that you have gained as a result of family history, right? I think about all sorts of stuff, right? I've learned about the American Revolutionary War. I didn't know anything about that until I started researching my family history and their involvement. And now I'm kind of obsessed, right, with that period. I have learned an incredible amount about British history, surprise, working for a British company. But every time I find a record, there's, we know the old saying, right? For every question you answer, there's another 10 or 20 questions behind that. So what are the questions that you've answered as a result of that? And it's... So it's always good to know that kind of ripple effect. And it's always good to ask those questions and kind of chase those little tails. I'm going to go, there was a couple of comments actually that I wanted to focus before we get to our guest today. So Linda said, just to say, very impressed with support. Every one of my corrections to the 1921 census have been done in super quick time. Thank you. Thank you, Linda, for saying that. And thank you for recognizing them. Our customer support team works incredibly hard. And I know I'm biased, but they are the best in the business. And we love them and we protect them and we cherish them. Our customer support team is amazing. And in particular, through the last several months of the 1921 census launch, they have just been outstanding. So they really deserve a huge amount of applause and gratitude. They are absolutely incredible human beings. And we're very grateful to them. Very, very happy that that they are with us and they're part of our team. William also adding his love support did really well in refunding the very high overpayment for premium upgrade. I think the support team needs some kind of bonus for the amount of difficulty they've had with the system. Yeah, there were some glitches for sure on that. So William, glad that got taken care of for you. And kudos again to the customer support team. There was another one. Oh, Jenny, yeah, I wanted to bring this one up. That's another reason I'm on here. I found a 1921 census that needed correcting, and that creates a great opportunity for us, Jenny, to talk about that. There are a couple of ways that you can send in those corrections and make sure that they do get addressed. At the top of the transcription page on Findmypast, there's a little button that says more, and it gives you the opportunity to report an error. We would invite you to do that. As on a number of different records, anytime you find a mistake, we definitely want to know about that so we can fix it. That does get sent into us, and you will get a response saying that we've received it, and then you'll get a response saying it's been corrected or not, and why that might be. So please do submit those error corrections. We really do want to take care of those as much as we can. A couple comments about newspapers. This is good. Christine, the old newspapers can be horrifically graphic. That is very true. So definitely want to kind of go into those newspapers a little bit prepared mentally. I have been unable to rid myself of the memory of a detailed account of a sickening road accident in the Newcastle area. I read it more than a year ago, probably. Yeah, that's impactful for sure if it's stuck with you that long. But absolutely, those newspapers are definitely very graphic. They report in ways that we definitely would not do today, right? Descriptions on deaths, suicides in particular, are quite graphic in many cases. So yes, definitely a good word of caution on there. We've got some question of the week responses coming in. And Ellie has shared the link on reporting an error. Thank you very much, Ellie. That will walk you all through that process. Question of the week, question of the week, question of the week. Okay, so I think that we will go to our guest. I'm so excited. So I think I'm pretty sure, keep me honest here, you guys, but this is her first appearance on Findmypast Live. She's nodding yes, so that's good. I am very pleased to introduce to you one of our newest staff members, Charlotte Ward. Charlotte has an incredible background, and she's been with us maybe about 6 weeks or something, and I have already learned so much from Charlotte. It's unreal. She is our new digitization operations manager, and she is extraordinary. I'm going to bring her in. Charlotte, you ready? Hi, Charlotte.
Hi.
Welcome to Findmypast Live.
Thank you for having me.
And oh my gosh, it's an absolute pleasure. So, because it's your first chance with the community, why don't you give them just a quick little who you are and what your expertise and where you come from?
Yeah, so thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm blushing. So I'm digitization operations manager. So I basically help to make sure that all of those records get on the website and kind of research them and find out more about them and share them all with you. So my background, I'm a naval historian, studied naval history. I've worked at all sorts of places, including Kensington Palace and Lloyd's Register Foundation in the Lloyd's Register Archive, and various other museums and sites across kind of London and Essex. But yeah, really, really excited to be a part of Findmypast now.
Yeah, and so Charlotte and I already have our little inside joke. I refer to her now as the expert on all things floaty, but it's a great addition to the Findmypast team. We've had Paul Nixon as our military and World War I British Army expert for a number of years. We've had people kind of with some knowledge of the Royal Navy, etc., in and out, but it's fantastic to have someone with Charlotte's expertise and caliber of education, and her research is extraordinary. And we are going to talk today, Charlotte, about a very special anniversary. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let you take away.
Thank you. I saw a comment just pop up. Is that victory behind you? Yes, in 3 different forms. There's a photograph, a big model, and a little model next to it. That sort of a victory celebration behind me at the moment. Great. So I am here today to talk about the Battle of Trafalgar, because the day marks 217 years since the battle. As I said, I'm a naval historian, and it was learning all about Nelson and victory and Trafalgar as a child that really kind of sparked that interest. So here is a photo of me lovingly staring at a figurehead of Nelson that's in Historic Dockyard, Portsmouth. So this is going to be a very brief overview of the battle. You could go into so much detail about the ins and outs of it, but I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of everything. So if it all works. So a bit of the background. So the Battle of Trafalgar took place, as I said, on 21st of October 1805, and became one of the most famous battles in history. So by 1805, Europe was in the grips of the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon pretty much dominated continental Europe. This came off the back of several years of the Revolutionary Wars with France. But at this point, Britain's Royal Navy still ruled the seas. However, there was that kind of fear in Britain of invasion and threats to its overseas territories. and its trade routes. And this was a very real threat. Napoleon wanted to invade Britain and get rid of them, get them out of the picture so he could dominate all of Europe at the time. And there was this huge force amassing in the combined Franco-Spanish fleet. So the Franco-Spanish fleet, under the command of Vice Admiral Villeneuve, by kind of 1805, had been chased by Nelson and his Mediterranean fleet all the way to the West Indies. So there was a sort of a plan here, sort of, that maybe if they got Nelson and the Mediterranean, out of Europe, over to the West Indies, the French could then amass a huge fleet and invade Britain. Nelson also had an idea that he could catch up with Villeneuve, engage him in a battle, and annihilate the combined Franco-Spanish fleet. But the combined fleet was able to escape back to Europe, with Nelson kind of following on behind. So when the combined fleet arrived back in Europe, Napoleon instructed them to join him kind of off Brest, up north, and start to amass this kind of invasion plan. But Villeneuve, for various different reasons, decided that actually he was going to sail south and anchor in Cadiz. This put pay to Napoleon's kind of plan for invasion, and he was left a little bit baffled by the situation. But that was what happened. Nelson, meanwhile, he'd returned home from the West Indies. He was a bit frustrated, as you can imagine, but he asked that his majority of his fleet go off and kind of blockade the French and the Spanish, keep an eye on them. What were their movements along the French and Spanish coasts? What was going on whilst he went back to England. And whilst in England, he had conversations with the Admiralty. There was a famous meeting between Nelson and Wellington that took place. And then he returned home to Merton to see Lady Hamilton and his daughter Horatia. And it was whilst in Merton he had word from his second in command and friend, Cuthbert Collingwood, that the combined fleet had now moved to Cadiz. And Nelson kind of responded with, "I am sure you bring me news of the French and Spanish fleets and that I shall have to beat them." So then off he pops back to Portsmouth, on to Victory, and away he goes back to join his fleet. So by the time he kind of gets back, he's heard from Collingwood that they are in Cadiz, and Collingwood believes that they're going to leave Cadiz. Nelson isn't so sure about this because that would be a foolish plan, but he kind of believes that this could happen. So Napoleon has had to go back into Europe, and he wants Villeneuve's fleet to sail from Cadiz around through Gibraltar and then up to Italy and into the Mediterranean to support his military campaign. So this would mean leaving Cadiz. Now, the officers of the Franco-Spanish fleet weren't sure about this plan. There was the British fleet just sat there waiting, blockading them, and now they had to leave there where they were kind of relatively safe. So they discussed not following Napoleon's orders, but said that they would if they could guarantee that they could easily beat the British and not really engage in a battle. They didn't want a battle per se, and that they could kind of sail on through unscathed. So, looking more closely at the fleets involved. So the British and the Royal Navy, we had under the command of Vice Admiral Nelson and his friend and second in command, Collingwood. Now, Collingwood and Nelson had been friends for many, many years. They were very close. They were very different personalities, but good friends. And Collingwood was once described as being like the Watson to Nelson's Holmes. He's my favourite. Collingwood is my favourite of all of them. Probably one of my favourite characters in history, full stop. And I've got a lot of love for him, and I think more people should talk about him, and not just Nelson, but that's just me. And then on the other side, you have Villeneuve and Gravina. Now you can see that the Franco-Spanish fleet vastly outnumbered the British. So the British had 27 ships of the line. These were warships. So the battles were traditionally fought in two lines, line of battle. usually kind of sort of facing each other, and then you kind of volley broadsides and shot and cannons at each other until one wins. And normally it's going to be the one with the superior gunnery, or the most amount of firepower, the most amount of ships and men. So you can see here that if that type of battle was to take place, the Franco-Spanish vastly outnumbered. So examples of kind of a ship of the line would be HMS Victory, HMS Royal Sovereign. Those were the two biggest for the British, and then the Santissima Trinidad and the Santa Ana for the Franco-Spanish. The Santissima Trinidad at 136 guns was the biggest ship afloat at the time. So you can see that going into a battle, the British were outnumbered. But that didn't bother Nelson so much. So he knew that not only did he have to win if there was to be a battle, not only did he have to win, he had to annihilate the enemy, completely destroy the Franco-Spanish fleet. So he wrote, he came up with an idea, he came up with a plan, and he wrote the Nelson Memorandum, which he sent to his second-in-command, Collingwood, on the 9th of October. So basically he decided that rather than engage in a two-line battle, which was tradition, he would form into two columns, with Victory at the head of one and Royal Sovereign at the head of the other, which you can see kind of here on the plan there. This would mean that the British could go straight into the Franco-Spanish line and split them up. Then each ship could take on each other ship in kind of a piecemeal sort of fashion, and they could ultimately create this kind of pell-mell style of battle: chaos, disorder, disarray, confusion, and destruction. That was his plan. He spoke regularly to his officers about this plan, so that during the battle, each officer knew exactly what to do. And basically, he sort of said, you know, you can't go too far wrong if you just put your ship up against the enemy ship and just attack them. Just go at the enemy. So this was kind of his plan, and this is how it kind of came together. The concerns of his officers were that Victory and Royal Sovereign had to be at the front of the two columns. Now, normally an admiral wouldn't be at the front, they would be in the middle, back, or off to one side. And they didn't want to risk their admirals at the front. But Nelson and Collingwood said, no, we're going to be at the front. We're absolutely fine with this plan. And that's sort of what he put together. So, technology went a bit wrong there. So once the plan had been put in place, Nelson got word about the 9th of October that the combined fleet were going to leave Cadiz. They then couldn't leave Cadiz because of the weather. So a few days later, on the 19th of October, they were able to finally leave Cadiz. As you can see, kind of come from Cadiz going towards Gibraltar. So Nelson then gave the orders that his ships should pursue the enemy ships. So at 6 a.m. on the 21st of October, 1805, the two fleets finally sort of sighted one another. And at 6:40, Nelson gave the order to prepare for battle. Over the next few hours, the ships come closer and closer together. And by 11 a.m., Nelson knew that within the hour, they would be engaged in battle. So Nelson famously puts up his signal. England expects that every man will do his duty, and then puts up a signal to say, engage the enemy more closely. And he wouldn't be putting up any more signals throughout the battle, though that normally happened, because he knew that all of his officers knew exactly what was expected of them. So the battle itself. So at 11:50, Villeneuve gives the signal to engage the enemy. Now, Collingwood and Royal Sovereign was the first to reach the combined fleet, and he fired a broadside into the Santa Ana. And this meant that he was able to break the line and let all the ships behind him in the column kind of go through. At the moment, he's kind of hitting the combined line. Collingwood says something along the lines of what Nelson would give to be here. Nelson, meanwhile, is saying, look at that noble fellow Collingwood and see how he takes his ship into action. So they're both kind of thinking of one another at this moment in the battle. But Nelson didn't have to wait long. to finally get into the midst of it. Victory headed towards the Santissima Trinidad, but then they saw that the admiral's flag was flying on another ship, so headed off in that direction instead. The Santissima Trinidad, as I said, was the biggest ship. Because she was so big, she was kind of stuck. So she's kind of stuck at the front, and she just sort of gets hit regularly throughout the battle from all sides. So Victory then becomes entangled in another ship called Redoubtable. This kind of moves onto one side, and his column comes through. So now the British ships have done exactly what Nelson wanted. They've crushed through the lines and scattered the Franco-Spanish fleet. So when Victory and Redoubtable had come entangled, there was a moment where Redoubtable may have boarded Victory. So Temeraire, now known or became known as the Fighting Temeraire, soon came alongside Redoubtable. The French described Temeraire's broadsides as being murderous. So kind of within half an hour, the Temeraire had almost completely destroyed Redoubtable. There were around 300 killed, 222 wounded, and Redoubtable surrendered. So as you can imagine, I think I've seen some come up in the comments as well. This would have been absolutely terrifying. There were cannons and broadsides firing minute by minute. A ship of 100 guns could be firing 50 cannons on one side at one time. So not only do you have the smoke, the smell, the gunpowder, you also have if a ship was hit, the wood splintering, and the splintering causing considerable damage to the men who were on the ships. There'd be blood everywhere. Decks had to be sanded before battle because of the blood and slipping around. So you sanded the decks to try and stop yourself from slipping. Then you would have masts creaking down. I think it's probably an indescribable experience that only those who were there could understand. It is impossible to kind of really fully imagine, I suppose. So the battle continued. It was ferocious, but the superior British gunnery and tactics meant that the combined fleet started surrendering across the fleet, each ship maybe surrendering to another ship. So, for example, like the Santissima Trinidad of 136 guns surrendered to HMS Neptune, which had about 98 guns. So a significantly larger ship surrendering to a significantly smaller ship was something that was just happening during the battle. So when Victory was engaged with Redoubtable, Nelson, who was, of course, wandering around the decks, keeping an eye on the battle, wearing his full uniform, was shot by a sniper through the shoulder. So this is a photograph I took at the National Maritime Museum. And you can see where the bullet entered where it entered on his coat. It smashed his ribs, pierced his lung, severed a major artery. He was taken below deck, and his surgeon knew that there was absolutely nothing that could be done for Nelson. So in his final hours, this was about 1:15 in the afternoon. For about 3 hours, he was constantly told what was going on, and he held on for those 3 hours until he was finally told that Britain was triumphant. Battle still ensued after he died. Several Franco-Spanish ships didn't want to give up or didn't know that they should give up, but basically Britain had won the day. He was there with his friend Captain Hardy. He told Captain Hardy to take his body home, to look after Emil Hamilton. He famously asked Hardy to kiss him, which Hardy did, and then he says, "Thank God I have done my duty." The news of Nelson's death then spreads across the fleet and reaches Collingwood. So Collingwood, as I said, was a good friend, devastated at his loss, and then has to take command. So after the battle, though the British were victorious, obviously there were thousands who lost their lives, thousands wounded, and 20,000 or so were taken prisoner. The French and Spanish lost 18 ships. They were taken back as prizes. 11 had escaped back to Cadiz, and 4 just disappeared at the end of the battle, tried to escape. They were captured a few days later, or a few weeks later, so they didn't get away for too long. The British didn't lose a ship, and Collingwood, so after the battle, a storm raged in Cape Trafalgar. So though the British tried to take prizes home, Collingwood knew that in order to save his ships that were beaten and battered and bruised themselves, he had to get out of Cape Trafalgar. So many of these prize ships were sunk, like the Santissima Trinidad, or let loose and recaptured by the French and Spanish. So then news has to reach home. So Collingwood writes his dispatches, and he sends a crew back to England on one of my favourite ships of all time, HMS Pickle. I love HMS Pickle. News then reaches the Secretary of the Navy, William Marsden, and then spreads across the country. Now, not only are people celebrating this great victory, but the country is mourning the loss of Nelson. So papers up and down the country post detailed accounts of what happened. Collingwood's dispatches, letters, correspondence, maps, all a kind of blow-by-blow accounts of the battle. People were really obsessively interested in what happened at Trafalgar. And the other thing you can find in the newspapers, all of these are found on the British newspaper archive, was Lord Nelson's funeral. So his death was reported in great detail by Collingwood, and he writes about how it's his loss and the nation's loss. And then we go into preparing for a funeral. So we know Nelson was, of course, brought back to Britain, famously in a kind of cask of spirits. Then he was lying in state in the Painted Hall at Greenwich for 2 days in January. Thousands flocked to see him. And then his coffin was taken up the River Thames to Whitehall, where it stayed for a night. And then the following day, on the 9th of January, the procession was led from Whitehall to St. Paul's. And again, thousands lined the streets. There were rooms being rented for people to watch it, to stay for the night, as seen in an article here from The Sun. And details about who was the who's who of British society and British military and naval life was attending this funeral. It was one of the grandest state funerals of the era. And then commemorative cups, other paraphernalia was sold after the funeral and for several years afterwards. So this cup you can see at the National Maritime Museum, again celebrating Nelson and his life. So bringing it all back to Find My Past, there's a chance that if you have an ancestor who served in the Navy during this time, that they may have been at the Battle of Trafalgar. There are about 110,000 men serving in the Navy at the time, and about 20,000 were at Trafalgar. So quite a significant number of the Royal Navy were there. So we have a collection of ships' musters books. So prior to the introduction of service records for the Navy in 1853, a muster roll was kept by the ship, and this was kind of who was on board at any given time, would have name, age, where they were from. Though it won't necessarily say, oh, he was at Trafalgar, you may find that if you look through and look at the certain ship names, know that they were at Trafalgar, see the muster year, you can make educated guesses that this person, William Adams in this case, may have been at Trafalgar. So muster year 1805, served on Victory. I picked this one because William is from Essex, which is where I'm from. So that's why I picked him. But we have the transcription and the images to go through, which is fantastic. So these musters come from the National Archives. We don't have them all. We have about 280,000 records. And to be honest, not many from the ships at Trafalgar, but Victory is on there. Then we have our Royal Navy pensions and wills. There are over 1 million records on Find My Past of these. Some just transcriptions, some will include images. Again, not necessarily going to say he was at Trafalgar, but we can make educated guesses. But this is a will. Wills may have been written when the sailor joined the Navy or when he mustered on a certain ship. So we have here James Pooke, who wrote his will on the 8th of June, 1805, for his time on Temeraire. So again, Temeraire we know was at Trafalgar. We then also have the pension book from Greenwich. So pensioners for the Navy could be out pensions. So these were given to veterans who were living independently or in pensions who were living at Royal Hospital Greenwich. So here we have Joseph Burgin, who was 26 when he got his pension. He lost his left leg, and we know he was injured whilst serving on Victory, and his last ship he served on was Victory. He was recorded in the book in April 1806. So again, likely that he was at Trafalgar. And then finally, one of my favourite sets, I think just generally on the site anyway, is the London Watermen in the Royal Navy, 1803 to 1809. So watermen worked the Thames. They would carry passengers and cargo. And when the Navy needed volunteers or went out with their press gangs, they liked to target those who had a maritime background, like watermen. So these records are transcriptions made from two lists, and one of the lists is 105 members of the company of watermen who were killed in action in the Navy. And here it does say that this chap, William Wolfe, was killed off Trafalgar in HMS Colossus. So if your ancestor was a waterman in the Navy, you've struck gold with these records. These are amazing. But if you've gone through all of those and you have found your ancestor in Victory's muster book, or you found their pension record, and you do want to confirm that they were at Trafalgar, these two resources are freely available online. So Mackenzie's Trafalgar Roll, which was published in 1913, and the National Archives compiled a database of 18,000 names of those at Trafalgar. So all of those men that I picked out just before, I ran them through both of these, and they were all at Trafalgar. So you're able to kind of confirm if you really want that kind of, yes, my ancestor was at Trafalgar. So that was a very whistle-stop tour of the battle. If you want to learn more, these are some books that I recommend. So The Pursuit of Victory by Roger Knight is my favourite biography of Nelson, and it is one of the better ones of him. There are so many out there, but I really recommend this one. There's two books on Trafalgar by Roy Adkins and Tim Clayton and Phil Craig. And again, I just want to promote Collingwood because he is my favourite. And I think everyone should know more about him. So this biography by Max Adams is brilliant. And of course, if you're out and about, do go to the Historic Dockyard in Portsmouth and wander the decks of Victory. Or there's a great exhibition at the National Maritime Museum called Nelson, Navy and Nation. And you can see not only the Trafalgar coat, but also other bits from Nelson, his stockings and his breeches. And all sorts about the history of Nelson's Navy, him and the Battle of Trafalgar. So yeah, that's me.
That's fascinating, Charlotte. That was so good. So I'm just sitting here reeling from all that information. I admittedly don't know a lot about this period of Navy history for England. Surprise. But I'm thinking, I have two thoughts in my head. First, I don't think the image of sanding the decks because of the blood had ever occurred to me really before. So that statement will probably stick with me for a long time. Obviously, they would have had to do that, right? I mean, it makes sense, but it's, wow, what a mental image that is. And the second thought I'm having is the next time I'm over in London, you and I are going to go visit the Victory because I've never actually made it there. Oh, and Elle's coming too.
Yeah, I think I just need to plan a sort of floaty outing around the site.
Yes, let's have a floaty outing. I love it. Yes, absolutely. So brilliant. That was really, really interesting. Lots of good comments coming in. So thank you very much for being with us today. One of my favorite comments, I'm going to scroll back. Oh, it's actually from Liam. I've never had to do any naval research, but need to find an excuse. Now, I'm with you, Liam. I'm definitely going to be digging into this in more detail for sure. That was really interesting. Thank you. And then we know that you will be back, of course, on Find My Past Live, back in November to talk specifically about tracing naval ancestors, right?
Yep, and looking even more specifically at the kind of First World War and your naval ancestors there.
Excellent. I know there was a couple of people that made comments about both World Wars, actually, as we were discussing the anniversary. So fantastic. That would be something I think they really look forward to. So I will say, so William actually said, go to HMS Warrior as well, and they swing on the hammocks. So I actually have a pretty extensive background with U.S. Navy. My dad was in the Navy for 18 years, so I've visited lots of ships. I just haven't gotten to the British side of that story just yet. So, but I do like it when they do things like that, when they swing in the hammocks and they let you play with things. And yeah, it's all good stuff. Okay, so yeah, and even like comments coming in about naming patterns, right? Victoria saying that I've just looked up an ancestor. Nelson is a middle name. Understand now why he was named after him. He was born late 1805, soon after Horatio Nelson's death. Yeah, I actually have one of these as well. One of my American ancestors' middle name is Horatio. So this kind of awe for this man spread very much around the world.
Yeah.
It was definitely not isolated just to the English. So yeah, absolutely. It is important. It's an important note, Victoria. We definitely want to look for those kinds of events in history that would explain some of the naming traditions, naming patterns of our own ancestors. So, fantastic. Kim just made the same comment, right? Hadn't made the connection before either, but her third great grandmother's brother was named Nelson. Yeah. Cool. Well, Charlotte, thank you very much. We are going to let you get on with your day. So thank you for being with us. And we'll keep talking. So, fantastic. All right. As Charlotte carries on with her day, I am going to set up for a product demo. Oh, Charlotte just let me see if we can. There we go. That was great. We have a new feature on the website on Findmypast that I really want to talk about. We've got about 13 minutes left, you guys. So we're going to talk about this, and then we'll try to get into the question of the week. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves, of course, as well. I am I have to do that, and then I have to screen share a different thing. We introduced a new feature this week that I think is incredibly beneficial, and it's one that we have been kind of wanting to add to the site for quite a long time, and it's in our tree. So let me pull that up. So when you now go to Find My Patch tree, Victoria, you can't get rid of Charlotte. She's one of us. She is. Absolutely. She's indoctrinated and everything. She'll never leave now. Okay. On the Find My Patch tree, this new feature has been introduced just in the last week or two. And for me personally, it's quite important. So I really want to make sure that we are telling you guys about these kinds of updates. So on the tree, you now have the ability to change gender of someone in your family tree. Now, that could be someone who is still alive, or it could be someone from the past. And it is much more precise, I think, in terms of what we've possibly offered in the past. We now have the ability to create custom gender on the Find My Past tree. So I've actually made a pretend tree. These people aren't real. Just to say that, I've realized while I was looking at this that some of them have some really long lifespans, and that might not be terribly realistic, but that's okay. So if you click on any one of your people in your tree, you can change their gender. So if you just go here, go to gender here in the sidebar. Yeah, you can see my mouse, and you click on edit. What this allows you to do is do female or male in the traditional pattern, or you can click on custom. And when that happens, you get a couple of options. So you can say their gender identity. So we'll just use gender fluid as an example. Oops, I gotta spell it right. Or you can absolutely say prefer not to say. You can also choose their pronouns from, we think, a relatively good list. Now, there are a huge number of variations of pronouns that exist. We tried to pick the ones that we thought would come up the most often. So we're going to just go ahead and say that this person, Sarah here, prefers they, them pronouns, or of course you can prefer not to say. And we can choose their avatar for them. So if they identify as female or male in a traditional sense, or perhaps as they, them, in this case, we're going to change it to that kind of yellowish neutral avatar. And really represent this human being in the way that they want to be represented. And when you click the update button, it simply changes their profile. So now you see that it says gender fluid. Their avatar has changed to that yellowish color. And and you're done, right? It's really, really simple and straightforward, but it gives us the opportunity to represent our family members, both current and in the past, in a way that is reflective of how they genuinely feel about themselves. This change does not reflect in the search capabilities at all. We all know that records historically choose male and female as the gender. And we've built the change into the system in a way where it will still produce hints, it will still produce all those great record discoveries for you, but it will allow simultaneously allow you to represent your family members in the way that is most appropriate for them. You can edit this back, of course. You can go back and forth and adjust as needed. And we also have information here about how we actually use this information, or in this case, actually don't use this information. And of course, we know that living people remain private and on the tree and are only seen by you, by the owner of the tree. So it doesn't affect search results or impact how we look for record matches at all, but it does give us the chance to represent our family members in an appropriate way. So we're pretty excited about this change, and we want to make sure that all of you had the opportunity to see it in action and understand that it exists. We're hopeful that this is a positive change for all of our customers around the world. Every human has the right to represent themselves in a way that is appropriate and feels good to them. And we want to make genealogy and family history just a little bit more inclusive by being able to represent yourself and your family members on the tree in a really appropriate way. I will finish this little demo by giving just a small story. I made a couple of changes. I have two family members that are currently making decisions about themselves. They both go by they, them pronouns. One of them is actually in the process of transitioning. And when I showed them this change and the ability that I had now, the control I had to actually represent them in our family in a visual way that actually feels good to them, I got some really emotional responses back. One of them actually called, and we had a very long conversation about why this is significant to them. And we both were in tears, and it was actually a really beautiful moment and allowed me to really see how important this is to the individual person. So it's not necessarily about the ability to change your research style or anything like that. It is a reflection of humanity. And that is one of the reasons why we felt this was so important. It is making family history a little bit more inclusive. With that, I will get off my soapbox and we'll go to question of the week. I could probably talk about that for a long time, but I won't. Okay, question of the week. I know there have been some comments that have been found. There's been a lot of comments. And did you guys all see what I did with the question of the week? I talked about the ripple effect, and then we had Charlotte on talking about boats. Get it? Get it? Oh, yeah. It's all about the boats. Okay. I thought that was really funny at like 7 o'clock this morning. I don't know if anybody else thinks it's funny. Okay, Christine says, I have used my genealogy skill to help get lost property back to its proper home. That's really cool. Reunite old documents with descendants. I have been recruited to help museums know where to look for the info they need when researching provenance of their holding. There might be some problems about their source. That's fantastic. I love it. Christine, you've turned genealogy research into like, sleuthing for heirlooms and documentation. That's amazing. Hopefully many people are doing that out there. I've tried to do that as well. I've returned things to a local historical society where my family is from, Washington State. So that is fabulous. Thank you for contributing that one. Let's see. I'm scrolling. And there's lots of comments about the Royal Navy and Charlotte's presentation, of course. I think I haven't gone back far enough, though. Question of the week. I'm looking. There we go. Andrew says, plenty of questions to ask, usually why. Yeah, it's one of my favorite, but no longer anybody to answer them. There are hints and records, though. There absolutely are. I think motivation is definitely one of the biggest questions we all ask each other, right? And ask ourselves when we're doing this research. Why would someone immigrate to the United States? Why would someone make a decision to change occupations? Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. The question why is kind of always sitting in the back of our minds. Gordon says that my great uncle George's will in 1904, he found out his blood relative great aunt May was actually not married to Joe. Oh, it's a Percy Chatley. Now this is interesting. A little bit of gossip here, Gordon. George was married to someone else who died in 1919, but no marriage record between them. 1919 electoral register shows May as Verlick. 1921 census showed her as May Chatley. Death cert has her as Verlick. Very confusing. Never found the marriage cert. Always go for wills now. What a great lesson to learn. Not just for you, but for all of us, right? This is sounds like a relatively complicated thing. I would want to draw it all out on the whiteboard and like make a map for myself. Fascinating story, Gordon. Thank you. And thanks for the lesson, because right, one question leads to another, but also shows us the importance of making sure we're doing that thorough research and going back to every possible source, like wills. Fantastic. Kim telling us, my main question that I find myself asking again is why. We definitely are seeing a trend here, right? When finding discoveries, sadly, most of my relatives never knew their grandparents, so every find is a new one. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of families out there like that, I think, that just don't have that kind of oral history tradition, and don't have the stories to rely on. Cap says, I found out about the Mormon pioneers, something I would have never researched if I hadn't found out some people on my maternal side were part of it. And it's an interesting piece of history. Definitely is. And impacts a number of different areas of the world, which I also think is always interesting. Okay, Jill, I found a rich history of the British coal mining industry. Many of my ancestors' lives and moves were influenced by that. I think that's a big one for me too. I learned a lot about different industries and occupations and areas of business that I otherwise probably wouldn't be interested in. And so I'm kind of in the same boat with you, Jill. Oh, there I did it again. It's a boat reference. That wasn't on purpose. Yeah, definitely learning a lot about different areas of the world and economics and politics and all of these different nuances to social history that you might not otherwise think about. Karen saying the ripple effect. Her mother has told her grandmother that she had 2 extra children who died young, managed to find their names and birth and death certificates. Now I always look for missing children. Yeah, very important one. Listening to that social history sometimes really matters too. And sometimes those stories feel like really like there's no way that could be true. But there's almost always a little nugget of truth in there somewhere where that story started. There's some little seed of information that is what you need to actually pull on, right? That's the thread you need to pull on. William says, for me, it's usually, who is that? That's the question that comes to mind for him. Often when I've asked other relatives questions or told them of discoveries, I'm usually told they lived next to these people, they were uncle or aunt, but for some reason people are referred to by other first names, and when solved their real names, that helps with learning a bit more as well. Yeah, I'm finding that a lot, actually, and I'm seeing it a lot in the 1921 census in particular. There's a lot of people going by middle names instead of first names, or nicknames, or that kind of thing. And I don't remember seeing it so heavily or prevalently in 1911, for example. So yeah, something I've noticed just in the last couple of weeks, actually. Jenny says she was surprised about the discoveries that she learned about her son's father's family. I think surprise and delight is kind of one of the reasons we all do this, right? It's one of the reasons that we're here, because that kind of just feeds the curiosity and just makes us ask even more questions. Okay, so then we get into all the comments about Charlotte's presentation, which were really, really good. We've got more questions about ships and boats. Save those. We'll try to feed those back to Charlotte and see if she can answer some of those in the comments. But again, remember that Charlotte will be back in November, so hold those questions if you don't get an answer, and we'll see if we can do. Maybe we should plan a live Q&A, Ellie, with Charlotte. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up, and Charlotte's being volunteered for stuff. Okay, let's finish with one last comment. All the whys. Why leave England from the unknown and the wilds of the colonies? Why keep moving westward and then back to the east? whys keep me searching for answers. Ellen, that's really well said. I think that's exactly why we all kind of get dug in and we consider this kind of addictive as a hobby. Absolutely true. Thank you all very much for being with us today. It's been a fantastic hour. We do have a meeting to dash off to on a Friday afternoon. So we hope that you all have a wonderful weekend. Please do enjoy those new records. Please do enjoy those new newspapers. Let us know what you find. We always want to hear about your stories and your discoveries. If you have them, send them in, discoveries@findmypast.com. And with that, we will call it a day. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend.